Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast, where we will be getting back to an amazing interview that we had with a very prolific author named Mark Muncy. Mark has some amazing stories and facts about Florida that most people are not aware of. If you happen to have missed last week's episode, I do encourage you to go back to your favorite podcatcher and listen. And for the rest of us, we'll get right back to this fantastic interview momentarily. Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, FromTheShadowsPodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar at YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started.
And she was there, and they were having a problem. All their fruit was being stolen in the night. So they set up traps. They set up strings, thinking somebody was coming in and stealing their stuff, or it might be fruit rats. And what they caught in one of the traps was a man who was about 6 inches tall.
Whoa.
Covered in hair and naked. Right?
Was this during spring break? Was this
1940s was pre-spring break fever, so
Wow.
But now they knew about Tom Thumb. They knew, Ringling. They knew Ripley's was opening his museum in St. Augustine. So they immediately thought, oh, he's a circus performer. He's screaming at him in a language they can't understand. Covered in hair, so they knew he was a man, he wasn't a baby. And so they called the police. And the police come out, and they can't figure out what the guy's saying. And they're like, obviously, this guy is not who's stealing your fruit, because, one guy like this isn't stealing all your fruit, And they think he's a circus performer, too, or something. So they let him loose. They cut him loose. But they're still losing their fruit. So they keep the traps up. They keep the strings up. And the next day, they catch him again, and this time they catch him with an orange. So they call the police back. Now, the police can't arrest the guy in handcuffs because he's too small, so they put him in one of the orange crates, and that's what stuck out with our part of the story. And they take him to the police station. Now, this is our witness remembers him coming in the orange crate. And them trying to get a translator. They got a guy who spoke Spanish, didn't understand the guy. They got a guy who spoke Portuguese, same guy, didn't understand him. They were trying to figure out what the hell language this guy was speaking. While they're doing that, back at the farm, all is loose. And branches are being thrown at them, fruits being thrown at the house, rocks are being thrown at the house. And it's dozens of these little people throwing stuff at them. And so they're calling the cops back, please come help us, come help us. And the cops come back with the guy in the box, and they let him loose to sedate the mass protest or whatever's going on. and it's nice to know cops haven't changed that much. And then they go off into the woods. And so we're like, oh my gosh. So we find out later that the late from another member of the family that what they did was one of the farmhands said, oh, they're red caps. they're fae, they're fairies from Ireland or something like that, and you've upset them with your farm, so you have to go get a blessed rock from Ireland and have it shipped here and put it out in your farm. And they actually did this in the 40s. Can you imagine the cost of this? Getting just some rock from Ireland in the 40s? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so we had the directions to her farm.
Trusting the post office to get it to you.
Exactly. Probably private courier. It's a blessed rock. Come on, you had to have a priest bless it. So, but they put the rock out there. Never had a problem since. That was the story. So we had the witness. We had a few other things, and we're like, okay, this is awesome. But let's go find that rock. We gotta go see if it's out there. And so we start researching. Figured out where her farm was. It is now owned by a conglomeration that makes orange juice, and I'm not allowed to say their name, but it rhymes with Schmapacana.
Can I say? Yeah, I was
so
gonna say, can I say?
Yep, it rhymes with Schmapacana, so it could be any.
Could be any of
them. Right? So generic, right? So, so we follow the directions, and we're taking, and we called them and said, hey, we'd like to just go see if this rock is there. And they're like, oh yeah, totally there.
Is this a good time to tell you about our new sponsor, Tropicana Orange Juice?
Oh wow, yeah. That's amazing! Yeah. I've never heard of them.
Tropicana Orange Juice.
I think they sponsor the Rays baseball stadium down here in St. Petersburg. I'm not familiar with that.
Enjoy the glass while you listen to after or in the Shadows podcast. Yeah. I don't even know. See, I'm thinking about the 6-inch guy. I can't even remember the name of our podcast. I mean,
so we get out there. We're following the directions. They're like, "Yeah, go out, take a picture, whatever. Just be careful. There's, and all this." And we signed some waivers, because we're driving on dirt roads out there and all that. And we're taking the turn. And we're taking the next turn, and we're like, "Oh my God, it's here!" And there are all these white boxes everywhere, and just standing out in the fields. And I'm like, what are those? And we pull up, and we're about to go walk over to where this thing is, and then that's when we realize, oh, those white boxes, this is where they keep their bees.
Oh, geez.
So we didn't get a picture of the rock, and instead my lovely and talented wife, she drew the picture of the gnome in the box for our book, and she illustrates all our stories for those monsters that won't pose for anything but blurry photos because they're all such divas. She'll bring the legends to life for us with her illustrations. So.
Well, so so this story is fascinating. Okay,
right.
Just for a point of reference, I looked up Tom Thumb. He was 25 inches tall.
25 inches, right?
25 inches. So they're even to think that, oh my gosh, this is like Tom Thumb. This would not. Tom Thumb would have to get kicked out of the circus because this guy would definitely. Yeah, this guy would have dwarfed him.
6 inches. Well, think of it this way: as a young man who had GI Joes, GI Joe action figures were 12 inches tall.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
G.I.
that's
Joes
what
were
I'm
12
thinking
inches
is
tall.
That's why we're trying to get the original reports from the police department. The problem is, the judge may understand this. 1940s police department documents are a little tricky to find sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's a little pre-internet archive stuff. So, and most of them weren't digitized.
Oh, they probably have all that stuff on like microfiche and stuff like that they don't even have the machines to even look at it.
Yeah, it's probably deteriorated too.
Yeah, that's exactly. They went to the stock pile where they keep it all, and a lot of it has ruined from mildew and stuff like that. But they do have, because like I said, this town loves the weird stuff. They want gnomes so bad that they're digging through all that stuff. They've got a team that's been digging through it for years, trying to find that initial report because that one civilian worker remembers filing it. Now, he remembers it being about a foot tall, not 6 inches. But that's, we're going by, like I said, a lot of different descriptions from, only a couple witnesses. And I'm going off that initial email.
Listen, 6 inches to 12 inches, unless you're in a certain kind of film industry, really, we're splitting. But, that's a tiny human being, no matter what.
A tiny human, and with full hair. And I just love that they were naked and that there was dozens of them. That's the part of the story that gets me, that there were multiple.
So
and then we met.
There's obviously something there, though, if they went to the trouble of getting, like you said, getting a rock and putting it. Yeah. So there's obviously something wreaking havoc that they believed that this rock was going to cure. And that's what we go through all this.
The thing is that, and this is what strikes me about the time frame that this happened. People of that generation were just very accepting of folklore and very matter of fact. The fact that they found a 6-inch man or a 12-inch man or whatever, if you found that today, obviously the word viral video, but back then people were just accepting that, this is, because kids in that era grew up without television and radio and obviously internet. And so they grew up on folklore and stories and mythology, and that folklore wasn't just fantasy; it was reality to them. Yeah. So it is as shocking as what it is to us now to hear these stories. Back then, I don't think it would have been as shocking to them, because they grew up with these stories, and that was the one thing that I was actually talking with my daughter about, who has to do this senior project. And I said, one of the projects you should do is the importance of folklore and bringing folklore back into elementary teaching and quit teaching for the test, because, folklore always has these, universal messages to them. You know what I mean? As well as historical truth. So, I think maybe that's why these people, they were, freaked out a little bit, but they went to the hassle of getting a blessed rock from Ireland because they just really believed all this stuff was real because they grew up with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, and now some of the stories, when we go out to investigate a place, we find there's a dark history behind it, and that it has nothing to do with folklore. It's a cautionary tale because of something dark that happened in the past. That turned into, one of our stories, Mini Lights, which is a local St. Pete legend. And that one is, you would say the word Mini Lights 3 times at this one house, and these ghostly lights would come out and chase you. Well, that didn't make much sense to us. And then if you heard it on the south side of St. Pete, it was this Mini Lights was actually Mini Lightning, the voodoo queen of St. Petersburg, and she would summon her alligator people who would come and kidnap you. What?
Oh,
how is that so different? And then so we start researching, and you start looking into it.
I think Florida should pay you to not tell stories and write books about it. Because you're.
Oh, I'm gonna turn everybody off to St. Petersburg here. So, I'm gonna kill my property value. So Mini Lights. We start researching. We start getting deeper into it, and it was so funny because if you ask somebody on the north side of St. Pete, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's a ghost story. It's a legend." And you go on the south side, and people are like, "Don't go messing with Mini Lights. You'll wind up dead." What the heck? So I'm curious. I'm trying to find this voodoo queen and her alligator people. I'm excited. Alligators in the sewers. That's the classic, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, to be honest, if you're weighing alligator people in the sewers or herpes-infested monkeys in the swamps, I got to go with the alligator people. Because,
exactly.
Because they're not. They may not have the lasting effect that the herpes.
Yeah, because. Well, I mean, think of it this way. if you go out on a date with a young lady and you have to explain to her, now listen, I'm going to be upfront with you about something. I have herpes, but I got it from a wild monkey that bit me.
And
it's like
mildly fatal.
It's like the whole
versus
it's like the whole AIDS thing,
Versus I don't
about they got it from eating like chimpanzee meat or something.
Yeah. Versus saying, well, I'm missing my arm because of voodoo crocodile or voodoo alligator.
Yeah, voodoo crocodile guy got me.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's
I gotta be honest with you, that is a much more believable story if you said, look, I lost my arm because an alligator man ate it versus, oh yeah, I got herpes because I got bit by a wild monkey.
I can't wait for the first story out of the Everglades about a herpes-infested skunk ape. I mean, you talk about a guy that has no chance.
I think I saw that movie.
Chance. Yeah, he has no chance at ever dating. He stinks, number one, and then he's got herpes, and he's just got big feet living out in the middle of the swamp. That guy's got no chance. But you know what? We'd probably see him out somewhere with somebody because there is truly somebody.
I'm not saying, hey Grover, I'm not saying that description matches one of the members of our podcast, but hey, I'll leave it up to your imagination.
Is it kind of like we're not allowed to say Tropicana? We can't say Jerry? Is that what you're saying?
Hey, I didn't mention any names.
Listen, there's no evidence that Jerry has herpes. So I'm just saying. I'm just putting that out there.
Just saying. He hasn't been intimate with any monkeys down here, so that we know of.
He hasn't been bit by any.
He hasn't been. See, Jason's laughing because Jason knows something.
I'm not going to say anything.
Okay.
He refuses to incriminate himself.
Yeah.
Did you bite Jerry? Jason?
So what did you ever find out? What did you ever find out about the lights? Was it the voodoo queen or was it something else?
It's so much worse. So the house that supposedly was this thing was a boarding house, and the lady who ran it was a Mennonite, and Mennonite mini lights, right? And she let. Hey, we're circling back. She let circus performers stay at her boarding house. And people used to yell at her and throw rocks at her house and say, Mennonite, go away, Mennonite, go away. And the circus performers would come out and chase the crowd away. Well, the crowd loved it so much that encouraged them to do it more until finally the house burned down, right? Well, that part of the story is kind of legit, but it actually took place in Gibsonton, the town we were talking about. It's across the bay. So how did that translate to St. Pete and mini lights and all this? Well,
and Mennonite is mini lights a play on words of Mennonite?
That's what we were thinking. And then we found out that this is actually a combination of legends. So yes, that is part of it. But the real part, the reason why the alligator people come steal you is because St. Petersburg at one point was the alligator farm capital of the South, because this is where the train stopped before it went down to Miami. So they would have alligator farms here, and they would entertain the tourists. And we were in the St. Petersburg Museum of History digging through their archives looking for stuff about mini lights, and we accidentally stumbled on this, and it was a fan advertising the alligator farm. And what it was is it looked like a Coppertone ad of an alligator biting the butt of a small African-American child. and we're like, what is this? This is horrifying. This is terrible. And then we started researching that train, and that's when we found out, oh my gosh, what the story is what would happen is these alligator farms would need entertainment. So they would kidnap children and throw them in the alligator pits and let them be chased by alligators to entertain them.
No, wow. Oh my.
And you would fan yourself with your little fan while you were watching this happen. And I'm like, this cannot be real.
No,
but it was totally totally real.
Are you serious? This is real.
Yep, and that's why you don't stay out late on the south side of St. Pete, because mini lights will get you. That's actually the men with lights. And they would come out with their lanterns looking for kids who were out late that they could kidnap and put into the alligator farm.
God.
This is what?
That's crazy.
Yeah. That is one of the crazy, like that. So what's the time frame? Like what? Like
the 30s, 20s and 30s. So this is the height of the Great Depression.
Unbelievable. I mean, here I was. I thought this was going to be, you're talking about the Mennonite. This was really a bordello.
Yeah.
And that was, we're going to have a Mennonite. There's going to be a Mennonite. The chick is going to, But as you're talking about capturing little kids, Roman style, throwing them in the ring to fight off. Oh my God! Now, how much further investigation? I mean, because obviously some of these kids did not make.
That's the problem. Is do we know? We don't know. This is the most records we found of it. They're still researching it. They're still investigating it. Now it's been handed over to. We handed that over to the University of South Florida, and they've got researchers looking into it.
Because there had to be
we partner with them a lot.
There had to be people that watched this happen, and
I'm sure.
Who were the people that watched? Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Well, there would be those would be people that were tourists coming down from the north, and if you understand the Great Depression, so understand historically the Great Depression is that people lost their homes, and so you would get these caravans of homeless people that would be living out of trunks of cars, and they would pull into basically fields and state parks, and they would basically have these like shanty towns. So you had these kids that would be running, young kids that basically running rampant, basically a homeless kid. So it was that would be perfect to grab those kids.
I'm merely like indicting the people who sat there and watched this happen and didn't, like, what kind of people are those that could sit there in the 1930s believe that was something that was, Judge, you and I have come up with some crazy stories that we've turned into screenplays. And never once did we think in modern America that something like that could happen. Okay. So, geez. But
I mean, think of it this way. But you got to think of it this way. If you're a tourist and you come down on the train, you go to one of these alligator shows, you probably assume that this is part of the act, that these kids are part of the act, that they're in on it. You know what I mean? Unless, of course, they don't accept the alligator and get ate.
Yeah, right up until the point where the kid gets ate.
Like, oops, sorry, the show went awry. Sorry about that. Well, you think about it this way. People, there are people that go to the circus hoping that the guy on the flying trapezes falls and dies.
Why do you watch a NASCAR race? You want to see the crash.
People watch hockey because they're hoping to see a fight. So, I think there's probably a segment of the population, especially back then, that kind of hoping that happens. So, there's something too, and keep this in mind too, that I've studied some psychology and stuff too, there's something about a group mentality that exonerates you from any personal liability. So if you're watching this transpire as part of a crowd, you basically have no personal liability for it. It's why you get these, modern day, you have these people that are rioting and doing all this stuff. This group mentality, they would never do that as a single individual, but when you put a group of people together, it sort of it dehumanizes them, and it's like, well, it's not really my fault. I'm just sitting here watching this. I don't have any responsibility.
Yeah, it was those other guys.
Crazy.
Mark, is this going to be part of the new book, Absolutely Horrifying Florida?
we the next one, we covered that pretty good in all the other ones. In the first one, Eerie, we hit mini lights, and we hit the Dozier School for Boys right out of the gate. So we hit some of the worst right out of the gate.
The Dozier School for Boys? Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. We'll keep going down the dark trail if you want. This one was basically 100 years of state-sponsored child abuse that we still don't know the full extent of. It was a school that we went there looking for ghosts because we'd heard all the ghost stories.
Was this place,
right after it closed?
Was this place the feeder ground for the alligator thing? I mean, it
might have been. This opened in 1911, and it was in Marianna, Florida, which is up right on the Panhandle, Georgia border. And it was supposed to house the worst of juvenile offenders, child rapists, child murderers, of their, kids who killed other kids who raped other kids, and things like that. And it was going to be 100 students were going to be there, or prisoners. And within 10 years...
Our top 100.
Yep, our top 100 of the worst are going to be put in this hellhole. Well, within a few years, it had 500 students with facilities for 100.
Oh, my God.
And then it got bigger. And allegations of abuse start immediately. Kids are raping each other, and murdering each other. And then it starts spreading to the staff allegations. And it stays. And then a governor comes and looks at the place, and he says, there's so much wrong here, but I'm not going to shut it down. And it never gets shut down. And finally, 2011, it gets closed.
What?
That's how long it's open. 101 years.
Wait a minute, 2011?
Yes. Gets closed. All right.
What?
So,
okay.
Now we're trying to, okay, the dark spot of our history is closed. There's a Boot Hill there. And they start realizing this place kept some questionable records. Imagine that. The Boot Hill has 31 markers, but there are only 24 recorded deaths at the place.
Okay,
and 6 of those were staff.
In 100 years,
yes,
the worst of the worst are all kept together.
Yep.
5 times capacity. And they're trying to tell you that only 26 people of the kids died. Well, okay.
Yep, and 30. Like I said, So the markers versus deaths doesn't add up. They also, now, as I said, it started as the worst of the worst. It became a place to get rid of the problem children of your town, or your own problem children, because kids started getting convicted and sent there for truancy. Being late to school got you sent to this hellhole. My favorite was one a kid got sent there for incorrigibleness in 1954.
Oh my gosh.
So if you were ever incorrigible, you could be sent to Dozier.
Which really makes sense to send a kid who was late skipping school to spend time with somebody who killed his brother or sister or the neighbor.
Yep.
Yeah, that really.
Yep. And a lot of it was mostly just kids without family who got arrested and had nowhere else to go, so they sent them there. That's basically what it became a dumping ground for. And whenever the press would come or somebody would come, they'd put on all these great pictures of the kids playing boxing. They had their own little zoo with an alligator.
And a herpes-infested monkey.
Infected monkey, probably. Anyway, they start. Professor Kimberly from USF, University of South Florida over in Tampa, she goes all the way up there to investigate this because she's hearing stories of these kids who survived it, now grown men who are talking about the horrors of the things that happened there. And so she wants to investigate this Boot Hill. And they're telling her there's a second Boot Hill that they don't even talk about on the other side of the property. And so she gets up there and she starts doing ground radar, gets permission, because the state wants to sell the land. They want this gone. They want it out of their history. They're trying to sell it to a developer to make a power plant up there. And but she starts investigating. She finds 55 bodies with 24 markers.
Oh,
my goodness.
Whoa.
And no records. So we start digging in, and that's when she did most of the ground. She did all the work. We just kind of hung along for a couple of the rides to find out more about it. And it's crazy, the stuff that we've discovered since. There's records of the kids would just be missing, presumed escaped. Student no longer here. They built a thing called the White House, which was this big white cinder block house in the middle of it, and that was going to be their new isolation, where they were basically, if you were so bad we had to put you away from everybody else, we're going to put you in this thing.
Solitary
and it had
confinement.
giant solitary confinement. Thank you. I couldn't think of words this morning. And they put the big industrial fans on it. Why industrial fans on this thing? I mean, it's Florida. It's not air conditioned, so they're dying of heat stroke anyway. But why industrial fans on this building? And so the story goes that was because that's where they used to beat the kids, and that's where they turned the fans on so no one could hear the screams.
Oh boy.
Oh man.
And the organization of survivors, the kids who survived this, is called the White House Boys. WhiteHouseBoys.org. If you want to read some really terrifying tales, that's where the survivors go to vent and to talk about the things they endured. And it also is where you can help donate to their legal causes to help them out, because they're still trying to get closure. One of the Professor Kimberly got sent up to Tennessee, where a boy who had been sent to Dozier had died, and his coffin was sent to Tennessee, and it was buried. Now, she found a grandnephew of the guy, and so she finally had a family member, so she was able to get the body exhumed, right? She goes and digs up the body. They dig up the casket. The casket is just filled with wood. There was no body. What they had sent to the family was a casket filled with wood and a note that said, "Died while escaping, hit by a train."
What?
And so nobody thought to open the casket because they didn't want to see the body of a kid who'd been hit by a train.
Oh my gosh! So you know what basically happened is they just kept that kid, claimed he was dead, and probably holy knows what.
They probably fed him to the alligator. Look, I'm telling you, there is a connection
between the
between this place and the alligator.
It's terrifying, and that's just it, and so so when we went there to look for ghosts, we were just like, we've got too much of a story here. We can't talk about the ghosts. It's just, it's yes, there's ghosts and hauntings there, but there's so much worse behind it.
Yeah.
So you went on an investigation there with ghost hunters or not?
We went on with one of the few that have been allowed, because right now that area is completely off limits, because it's, again, state still owns it and is trying to get rid of it. And they say the buildings are unsafe. Well, imagine that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. They're full of angry spirits that want justice. Is what they.
So if I can sum this up, the people of Florida are far worse than any monster or that you might encounter, because feeding little kids to alligators and the dozers, that's pretty much worse than the voodoo queen sending alligator men after you.
So,
that's true.
Suddenly,
and that's why
skunk ape sounds reasonably pleasant.
Yeah, exactly. The UFOs of Gulf Breeze and Miami, the ghost of Flight 401. These are all things that are all Florida, and then you get that stuff and you're just like, that's pretty terrible.
Now before we, because I'm keeping an eye on the time here, so before we end the episode with the one story that I really want you to tell, okay. let's get into a little UFO stuff, especially in light of the recent Department of Defense.
Oh yeah.
Kind of saying,
Admission.
hey, look, there's stuff here.
Yeah, the admission.
We got
stuff not
here.
of this earth. Quote.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah.
Yep.
So being down there near, obviously Kennedy Space Center, what is some really compelling UFO type story? What's some really good stuff from down there that?
The one we're working on right now that kind of led us down a rabbit hole, the one that led to Eerie, Appalachia coming, was the Crestview sighting, which was near Miami in the early 1953. And this one is a young boy who's outside, and he's playing on recess, and all the other kids are going in, and he's still staring up at the sky because he sees something unusual. It's kind of blue and spinning, and he can't figure it out. And the teacher finally comes over and is like, hey, come on in. He's like, no, what's that? And so the teacher sees it too. So now you got a kid and an adult, two witnesses. That's pretty big. And they see it, and they don't know what it is either. But eventually it disappears, and they both go into class. And the next day, everybody's talking about it. What did Jimmy see? What did the professor see? So it's crazy, They're all wondering. But it comes back. And now, hundreds of witnesses. Kids, teachers, everybody. They look out their windows, and there it is. Much closer. Blue, glowing, disc-shaped, with kind of a bubble on top like a turret, somebody said. And it brought friends, little ones, that are flying around it. And they fit the description of our most recent sightings, the ones that the Navy leaked, of the Tic Tacs.
Okay.
This is 1950s, and they're seeing this, right? Little tiny ones, and they're spinning around it, and they're doing this crazy show, and then they disappear. Now, there's no keeping the kids in the classrooms. They start swarming out to try to see this thing, and they're filling the field and leaning against the fence trying to see where these things were. And they come back again. And this time, it's like they warp in. They appear, and they start doing crazy maneuvers. The kids are loving it. The teachers are freaking out, not knowing what to do. And then they fly into a bunch of trees without disturbing the trees, like they flew into a portal. And the kids are all disappointed because they disappeared. But then the big one comes back, does one more little show, and then it takes off into the sky at incredible speed, disappears. Now, hundreds of witnesses. What makes this go even crazier is the military show up, and they start interviewing everybody.
Of course.
Yeah, they start interviewing everybody. What did you see? What did you see? They pulled select students out, select teachers out. And one of the kids says, well, they were hovering like a helicopter. So that became the official story. Oh, it was helicopters on maneuver from the nearby Coast Guard base.
Oh, my goodness.
And it disappears. Disappears from history. Nobody talks about it again for many, many, many years until these most recent releases. So now you go on Facebook groups, which is what I did, and said, does anybody remember the Crestview sighting? And sure enough, I have witnesses who are willing to talk about it now because they're no longer crazy that they just saw helicopters. They saw strange stuff. And these were kids, then, so they've grown up. Most of them are not with us anymore, but some of them still are. And so it's amazing to hear their stories and what they've seen. Now, what got me on the rabbit trail is that brought me back up north was I went and talked to one witness, and he had the notes from his parents when the military men came to investigate him later and question him at home. And the father had written down the names of the men who came to investigate him.
Ooh, okay.
So I had a Captain Sinclair, which was not uncommon, sadly. There's a few that it could have been. And so I'm still tracing down that lead. That was a Navy guy. There was a Air Force man whose name was a Smith. So that's real helpful. Yeah. And then the last one, though, freaked me out. The last one was the man in the suit, the shiny suit, and it was just the name Cold. C-O-L-D.
Oh, whoa. So you're talking about Ingrid Cold.
Ingrid Cold.
Oh, Jason.
And I'm like, and this guy has no idea who he's talking about. This witness had no clue. And I'm trying to not jump out of my seat and scream to high heavens that, oh my God, Cold has connections to the United States government.
Are you serious? Okay, so we just had on, because Cameron Jones, who is the number 2 Mothman guy in the world,
yep.
He was on about a month ago talking about the Mothman. In fact, we just played the second part of an interview with him on yesterday's or this week's, and that was one of the crazy stories, because I had sort of heard that story, and then I started looking into it. That's kind of like a bombshell right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God. And so suddenly I'm like, all right, I have to drive up north, and because we have to follow this up. And I'm talking to Darren Berger's daughter, who
the guy that got stopped by Ingrid Cold in the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we start following the trail. It's like, oh, so that's 1953. So this is a year after Mothman, and he's still active, and he's working with the government. And it's like, so, and then I'm finding more and more witnesses who are talking Mothman sightings after the bridge collapse. So he was still active, just nobody talked about him at that point because the newspapers didn't care, or were told to hush it up. So, and that's, so now we're down this big trail. We've got a lot of fun things coming from this book. I can't give too much away. It was supposed to be out in September. We were supposed to premiere it at the Mothman Festival. I was going to be a speaker, but that got canceled. So now it's like I got to sit on it a little longer, but that's nice because we're able to make a follow-up trip this fall, and we're going to be able to get a little bit more. We're going to add some more on Flatwoods and Hopkinsville Goblins. We've even got a tie into the Loveland Frogmen up in your area. And
the Loveland Frogman, all right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've got a timeline that I think will surprise everybody, and I can't wait to show it to everybody. And we even go all the way back to Serpent Mound and Alligator Mound.
I got to be honest. You dropping that name right there was a complete and total surprise, and totally like, boom! My mind's blown.
That was my immediate thought when that happened. I was like, I have to tell somebody, but if I tell too many people, I'm in trouble. But I got to tell somebody, and so immediately went to Seth Breedlove of Small Town Monsters and told him my connection, and he's freaking out about it.
That's the perfect guy to go tell. Oh
yep. We had just worked on the Trail of UFOs that's on Amazon, and I was his Florida guy to talk about Crestview and to talk about the Gulf Breeze sightings, and then he lost the footage for Florida. It all disappeared. So I'm only on the Blu-ray for like 5 minutes if you go to the behind the scenes where he mentions, hey, I lost all this footage.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so Shannon LeGrove Into the Fray, who hosts that, we've been on her a few times talking about it, and then you guys. So now you got the scoop. And that was just it. When I heard that, it changed everything. I'm like, oh my God, what? So much for this UFO book on Florida. That's gonna have to wait.
No kid, I'm my mind, and I'm the people that are listening to the show that have heard the Cameron Jones one and heard the whole story about Ingrid Cold. I think now they will be like, oh my, it's going to dawn on them like, oh God, what is this? This is crazy.
Yep.
That is crazy to just drop that name. And
on this guy's piece of paper that his dad wrote in the 50s, it's got an old phone number on it. It's got, some other things, and then those 3 names. Why those 3 names? And when I talked to the kid, he was like, yeah, the Air Force guy and the Navy guy asked him all the Coast Guard guy and the Navy and the Air Force guy asked him all the questions. The other guy didn't say a word, just kept smiling. And that, the more he said, the more it was like, oh my God, you do not know what you're doing here, telling me this. And I'm trying to keep, reporter face, and not just go, you are going to be, oh my God, you have no idea what you just did. So I just, took the notes and thanked him, and we've got his information, and we're going to talk some more when things get a little closer. But right now he's just happy. The problem is he's kind of a prominent citizen down there in Crestview, so he can't let it be known that he's associated with this stuff just yet. But the only reason he's willing to talk about it now is because of the Navy declassification and the Pentagon declassification.
Okay.
Wow. So is Seth then going to? Is he going to do like a documentary on this?
He's got other projects lined up, so this is going to be something we're going to cover with our show Eerie Travels when that gets back up and running. So.
Wow.
Oh, I can't wait.
That is fantastic. I can't.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know that people listening can kind of draw this line around everything. And like you said, with the recent,
the Pentagon declassification.
Yeah, with them just admitting like how crazy that is. Because look, if we have off-world vehicles, somebody was piloting them. Okay.
Yeah.
So, are those people deceased? Are those beings deceased? Or did we come and capture them or start working with them or whatever? And for you to find that connection between a story that is pretty well known in the Mothman circles to a story in Florida that's insane.
Had no previous connection except that it's similar time period. And again, one that had been forgotten. It's like that was what our angle on the whole thing was, that it was kind of a story that nobody talked about. Nobody talked about Crestview up until a few years ago.
Well, no, and when you hear UFO stories from back in that time period, you do not ever hear stories that are similar to the Tic Tac thing. You don't ever hear of the little ships that are nondescript and just doing all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah.
So here's to throw this out. So if Ingrid Cold was obviously not of this world, was an alien, if he was part and parcel of investigating UFOs, that leads me to believe that these UFOs were not the same race that Ingrid Cold was. So
and
he's there
kind of
as part of with. Yeah, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's that's the rabbit hole we go down is, what did we find? How does this work? And how do all these things tie together now? And that's just it. You find out that they do. And that's, I think, what's crazy about this book, and I can't wait for it to come out, and why I was just so into it. And now I'm loving that our publisher is giving us the extra, it sucked that we had to go the extra year, but now I'm loving it because now I'm able to expand all the stories even more and get more research and talk to more witnesses. Zoom has opened everything up, so now I don't actually have to travel and I can talk to people. And a lot more people are eager to Zoom with an author rather than invite this crazy guy who writes Eerie Florida books into his house. And but some of them I still put on the tinfoil hat for them just because they always mention it. So I keep one with me nearby. But it's fun. It's fun, and I cannot wait to share this with everybody. So believe me, that's why I'm telling it on podcasts now. I'm like, this isn't even the biggest thing that I can talk about. So that's the exciting part about this. I want to tell you guys more.
So the question is is our podcast going to get an advance copy?
I'm sure we can arrange that. As you call my publicist, they'll take care of it. Arcadia Publishing, that's for Mark Muncy's publicist. He'll take care of it. So.
Well, now I feel this is kind of just like a letdown for me to ask you to tell the story about Robert the doll. Because
there's never a letdown with Robert. We never let down with
Robert. Robert the doll is a good dismount that will leave our listeners pondering.
Yeah.
Yes. So
okay.
give us a good story around Robert the doll, and then we'll.
All right.
Because I got to be honest, my mind is still so about Ingrid Cold. I can't.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this. I think 2020 is probably because somebody ticked off Robert. So that could lead to all of our problems. So that's how bad Robert the doll is. Okay, but we love Robert. So the first thing we all gotta do before we even talk about Robert is we have to ask permission. Robert, is it okay if we talk about you today? And as long as the podcast doesn't die and we don't hear anything unusual, I think we're good.
Okay.
Do we need to ask too, Robert?
I would say ask it. I would just say don't poke the bear.
Yep, you're right.
Robert, I've experienced enough bad things. I don't wish to have you on my bad side or me on your bad side. So please allow Mark to tell us a story about how great and powerful you are, Robert the doll.
That's right. I second that.
Okay.
And I will humble myself. And ask permission for Robert to allow you to tell a story, just so I don't get any bad juju.
No bad juju.
Yeah, exactly. So Robert the doll, for those who don't know why we're going through all this rigmarole, is Robert the doll is a native of Key West, Florida, and he's still there. You can go visit him. And his story inspired one of the most famous film creatures of all time, Chucky, of Child's Play. So that's how important this guy is.
And if any of our listeners do not know who Chucky is, spoiler alert, it's a doll that will kill you.
Yes.
Yes.
Now Robert
indeed.
So Robert was the toy of Robert Eugene O'Neill, a young boy in Key West. Now, Key West at one point was the wealthiest city in America. It was the Beverly Hills, the Silicon Valley of its day. Everybody was there who was anybody. And he was a son of a very prominent family, and they could afford very nice things, and they bought this doll for Robert. Now, there's stories that the doll was a voodoo doll crafted by by somebody and all that. That's all bogus. You can find a catalog where you can actually buy a Robert the doll from the time period. Again, early 1900s. And he got this doll. Now, this doll is about 3 foot tall, and it was dressed in a little sailor suit. You could dress it so it would dress the same clothes as a child. It was basically the Cabbage Patch Kid of its day. And he took that doll everywhere. Now, the minute they got him, weird stuff starts happening. The servants are complaining. Stuff's breaking. They hear him talk to the doll, and the doll talking back in a different voice. So they start fleeing. And this Key West isn't that big of a town, and they're like, man, if we lose all our servants, where are we going to get more? So they go to him. They go to Robert, and they go, Robert, you've got to stop causing these problems. You got to stop acting out. And the boy goes, I didn't do it. Robert did it. And they're like, you're Robert. And he's like, no, the doll has decided it wants to go by Robert. I'm going to go by my middle name, Eugene, so we don't have any other confusion anymore.
What?
Now, modern days, we'd have given that kid some Ritalin and we wouldn't have a story. But, now they go on, and Robert the doll starts causing even more havoc. The parents finally get fed up, and they lock the doll in the turret of their house, up in the attic of the turret. And the house is now called the Artist's House. It is a bed and breakfast in Key West. Robert was locked up in the attic for years. The family moved out. They left the doll there. Poor Eugene, sadly, lost his best friend. But people kept seeing the doll in different windows of the house and moving around. And Finally, another lady buys the house. She moves in, opens the door, finds the doll, and realizes she's got the talk of the town. She's going to be, awesome. And so she starts taking them everywhere, doing little things, and bad stuff starts to happen. Again, more breaking things, more terrible things, accidents, just unusual situations. So she finally is fed up with the doll and gets rid of it. It's crazy. And so finally the doll Eugene finally moves back down to Florida, moves back to Key West, and somebody returns Robert to him. And he's so happy. And he's moved into his parents' old house. He's going to turn it into a museum and call it the Artist House, because he has become an artist. And he takes Robert everywhere. They go to dinner together. They go to the beach together. They have separate chairs. He sleeps in his bed, much to his wife's chagrin. The doll goes everywhere with each other. And then Eugene dies. And the doll is given to a foundation. It disappears. A few years later, a museum called the Fort East Martello Museum, because there's a Fort West Martello and a Fort East Martello. There's Civil War forts that have been converted into museums. And the Fort East Martello Museum comes into Robert the doll. He winds up at their place, and they don't know what to do with him. And so they just kind of keep him in storage. But Robert doesn't like that. He starts messing with the staff. At one point, a plumber is working on the sink, and suddenly the doll is standing right behind him.
Oh,
He refuses to work on the sink anymore.
Oh,
and
Are you serious?
other unusual stories like that, right? So they finally decide, okay, we got to display this guy because he's getting anxious.
Mm-hmm.
So they put him up, and within a few years, they realize there are rules you have to follow when dealing with Robert. The first thing is you have to, it's like gremlins. If you don't follow the rules, bad things are going to happen, right? Rule 1, you have to be nice to Robert. You have to be polite to Robert, or bad things happen to you. You get cursed. The second thing is you have to ask his permission when you talk about him or take his photo. So if you take a photo of him without permission, bad things happen to you. Now, what are the extent of the bad things, right?
Yeah, but how do you know whether he gives you consent to take his picture?
That's the thing. If you ask and he doesn't give you permission, your pictures aren't going to come out. Things are going to be blurry. Things are going to be weird. You won't know at the time because it's not like he nods or anything like that.
No, so we're screwed. We don't know if he gave us permission to talk about him.
We'll find out when this airs. We'll find out. Now, the thing is, though, we've followed the rules so far, and now if you screwed up and say you didn't take it seriously, there is a wall. Well, there was a wall behind him that had lots and lots and lots of letters. People had written to Robert saying, "We're sorry. We didn't believe you. Please save us from your curse. We hear you like letters." Now, after Hurricane Irma a few years ago, they wiped out a bunch of the letters, so they digitized them all, and it's now a big TV screen that just plays them when you go visit Robert. But you can spend a day just reading the letters. Now, 2 former presidents have written Robert. One was just to wish him a happy birthday. That's how serious this is.
Oh, my goodness.
Wishing Robert a happy birthday. Now, the letters are so amazing. My favorite is, Dear Sir Robert, let me call him Sir, I'm sorry I made fun of your leather face and called it ugly. Leather is actually very nice for a face, and you are quite handsome. I'm sorry we took your photo without permission, and I said those awful things. Please remove your curse. We get the message. Please fix my eye, my Xbox, and my marriage. And I love that he put it in that order.
I was going to say, maybe that guy's real problem is he put his Xbox in front of his marriage.
I think, well, he needed his eye to play his Xbox, so that made sense. But we're talking plane crashes, car crashes, terrible, terrible things. Now, when we went down to visit Robert for the book to get pictures, we went into the museum during the day and got some lovely photos of Robert, asking permission, being very polite. We asked the museum, to make sure it was okay and all that. They gave us specific instructions on how to present the photos in the book. And then we went back at night. There's a tour called Ghosts and Gravestones that actually lets you go and have some alone time with Robert after dark, after the museum's closed.
Does Barry White?
We got to go in there.
Is Barry White playing the background?
I think it's a bit more like Midnight Syndicate or Nox Arcana. I think it's a different kind of vibe. Maybe some Phil Glass from the Candyman soundtrack. But
kill.
Yeah. And we're in there, and everybody's taking pictures, and there's a bunch of people with the tour group, and we're trying to get another shot of Robert, and some people joking, some people just not sure what to make of him, and I'm trying to hang out to be the last guy, and I take a photo, so thank you, Robert, for letting me take the photo, and I leave, and then I realize I got myself in the reflection. I got some other things going. So I quickly asked the tour, can I just run back in for 1 minute, get one more photo? I'm like, sure. So I go back inside, take another photo, and leave. Now, we spend the rest of the day at Key West the next day and head out. And flat tire on the bridge, the 11-mile bridge, coming out of Key West, which is a lot of fun.
You forgot to ask him the second time.
Exactly. And some other bed. And of course, that picture is blurry as hell and didn't come out. Now, the other thing we didn't notice at the time was Robert has this little lion that sits with him. It's his little plush animal, but he's had it since the beginning. And what I didn't realize is our photos from when we were inside talking to Robert, the first time, and then I go back and take it on the second time, the lion is on the other arm.
The lion?
Blurry. It's blurry as hell, and you can't see it because that photo didn't come out. But the lion was on the other arm. So now we called down to the museum.
How did you start your letter to Robert?
It was, Dear Sir Robert. And
Pick
now
my
Robert
my Xbox.
Yes, Xbox. And what's funny though is I'm like, there's no way. Nobody got in there to move him around. He's in a case. He's in this. Now there's been stories where Robert's been found outside the museum. This is a priceless antique. And he's been found outside the museum after the museum's been locked up at night, standing by the front door with sand on his feet like he'd been out to the beach.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, and there's other crazy stories that the museum people tell us, and so it's, it's hard to top Robert, man, and I still think somebody said something to him, and that's why we got 2020 what we got.
Well, I wonder if they asked permission to make the Chucky movies from Robert. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Robert's got to know.
You might not have liked that last remake. Yeah.
It's like I lost track at Chucky Kills the Girl Scouts or whatever,
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah.
What? Oh, they
did that new one, the whole new robot or something, so he might not have liked that one.
Oh,
but if you go to our book,
EerieFlorida.com. So what's your theory on what is Robert? What is he? Besides
now in our third book, Creepy, we wrote about Robert in Eerie, and by the time Creepy rolled around, which is a few years later, we learned even more about Robert, and we learned more about the artist's house and where Robert was originally at. And that hotel, or bed and breakfast, notoriously haunted by crazy stuff and seriously powerful poltergeist activity, tons of evidence recorded there, and the turret room and Robert's room are two of the most active. Now, my question is, at that point, he's a doll. He's built in Germany and sent to Florida. What if it's just a doll, but kind of like Annabelle, who was just a Raggedy Ann doll. What if something got into it? And what if something from the artist's house got into Robert?
Isn't that, that's almost obviously has to be and what about
it has to be the case.
What about the lion?
Exactly.
The
lion might have something in it. Yeah. And that's our theory. We don't like to use the term supernatural, especially now. Look at like I said, with the Navy, just declassifying, we have stuff not of this earth. I think we like the old term Shirley Jackson promoted way back in the day called preternatural. It's stuff we just don't understand yet. It's stuff that we might someday. Like back in the day, people didn't believe in magnetism, didn't understand it, so they just refused to admit it existed. And I think that's what happens with ghosts. It happens with UFOs. I think it's what happens with Bigfoot. I think there's a lot more connections to all these things than we realize. And for years, UFO people wouldn't talk to Bigfoot people. Bigfoot people wouldn't talk to ghost people. It was like, oh, they're freaks. And now we're all realizing we're all part of the same thing. And these pseudosciences are no longer as pseudo as they used to be. We're learning quantum theory. We're learning parallel universes exist. We're learning, we've actually got proof of some of these things. So it's only going to be a matter of time before we realize, okay, ghost is something we just don't understand. Robert is just something we don't understand. Indrid Cold is something we don't understand. Doesn't mean it's tinfoil hat stuff. We just don't know. And that's what we're in for. We're in for the long haul to figure it. Hopefully we get some more connections and finding these connections, bringing them out. There you go. We've laid it out and hopefully somebody picks it up.
I am still standing by my theory that I had discussed earlier, that the Mothman, the Dogman, Bigfoot are all just nothing but intergalactic pets that these space travelers on their way past the Earth stopped, for like a bathroom break, and these are their pets that just got loose, took off running, and now they're just running wild all over because that's what your dog. If you're out there, it gets off the chain, it's going to take off running, and you may not be able to get it back. That is my theory. Is that all these creatures that we don't understand are from somewhere else and maybe got left here, got loose or whatever. But then again, we're talking about Robert the doll. How do we, because you're right. Just because we don't understand, and I think if we let ourselves, we could understand it, but a lot of people don't want to, it's got to be black or white, Yeah,
exactly. And then we're learning with quantum theory and string theory that, one of our researchers that we talked to when we were looking at the UFOs of Gulf Breeze, he's more convinced that it's extra dimensional. He's like, it's so much easier we're learning, it's so much easier to breach a dimension than it is to breach 100 billion miles in space. So what if they're just from a parallel, dimension? That's why people see green flashes before Mothman or Bigfoot, and people see things. What if that's why the footprints just disappear? They just stop. What if, people are always like, well, why is it always a ghost of a Victorian thing? Why isn't it a caveman ghost? Maybe that's part of what Bigfoot is. It's all these things are questions that we've got to answer at some point. And at some point we will. I firmly believe at some point we're going to realize that this isn't all bogus.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I agree.
You know what, Mark, as we wrap this up, I'm going to put this out there. Thank God for people like you that are trying to put answers to these questions and present it in a way that we can all maybe wrap our minds around. I got to hand it to you going out there and searching out these stories and because if you hadn't been searching for the one UFO story, you'd have never made this Indrid Cold thing that is gonna. I think once you put this out, it might blow the lid off of some stuff. I'm
certainly hoping so. If nothing else, I just hope more people talk and more people are willing to come forward, because it's always, oh, crazy Uncle Joe had that story. one of my favorite movies is Independence Day, and and the one guy, Russell Case got abducted by aliens. The aliens show up, they're blowing up our cities, and everybody still thinks he's crazy.
Well, it's because he claimed he got probed. You know, I mean,
right, exactly. But how do we know he didn't?
They're going to come. Yeah. Well, Mark. Okay, so tell everybody quick where they can come find more information about you, find your books, and if you have if you have a crazy story, whether it's Florida or Ohio and the Appalachian region, get a hold of Mark. Tell him your story.
Yep. You can find us at eerieflorida.com, EERIE Florida.com, FLORIDA. You can, that's our hub. It shows all of our, that links to all our social media and everything. It also is where you can order books directly from us, where we'll sign them, and my lovely and talented wife will, do a little doodle in there for you. And for a little extra, she'll do a nice sketch. And I know a lot of people love her prints, and she's got monsters and myths galore, because she's also illustrated a bunch of the other Eerie's that I didn't write. So she's done Eerie, Alabama, Eerie, New Mexico, a bunch of other stuff from our publisher loves her, so she gets to illustrate lots of the other books that they don't want me to write.
Is there any truth? Is there any truth to the illustration of the From the Shadows podcast crew that she's going to limited edition? She's going to do.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we could come up with something. I know she just finished a couple early Mothman prints, so we might go with those. But there's some others that are in the works for Eerie, Appalachia. We've been kind of sitting on them. They were supposed to start coming out, but because of the delay. But we're going to start leaking them out over the next year. But you can also find us anywhere books are sold. If you come to Florida at all, we're everywhere. You can find our books in like every gas station and thrift shop, and you go to Walgreens or CVS down here. We're in the little section because our publisher loves us, and we prefer you get it from your friendly local bookstore. Any of them can order it, but if you want them direct from us, we're happy to do that too. And that way you get a little something from me. And then you can also watch for Eerie Travels, which will be coming soon. Like I said, right now it's just got some pre-production stuff, but I think you'll all be excited to follow it and see where it goes. I've been excited to film it so far. So.
Well, we'll make sure we'll put some links up to that show when it comes out, so our fans of the podcast on our After the Shadows forum page can go check it out and make sure they can find you and see some of your stuff. So we're super excited. We've been texting back and forth behind the scenes. We're super excited to see where this whole other UFO stuff goes. So I know we'll be having you back to discuss what you could discuss when that stuff comes out, because
as soon as it starts getting a little closer, I will be glad to come back on, guys. It's been an honor. So.
No, Great. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has been very enlightening.
Yes, yeah. So, well, Mark, you stay safe down there in Florida. Dodge the hurricanes. Dodge the COVID-19. Dodge the herpes infected pythons.
Herpes infested pythons. Wow.
Well, they eat the monkey.
Yeah, that's true.
Imagine what those natural resource officers down there are like. Okay, what do we gotta worry about now?
We ticked off Robert. Now we got to deal with this now. So.
Yeah.
So okay, Mark. Well, we'll let you go, but thank you so much for joining us. This was great. And any of our listeners, get a hold of Mark. Tell him how great it was.
Yep.
And if you got some stories, I'm sure he's the guy that would appreciate him the most. So
right off eerieflorida.com, there's a button. Tell us your stories. Just click on that, and it comes right to me. So
fantastic.
Right. Well, thanks, Mark, and we will talk to you soon.
Have a great one, guys, and I'll say like we used to say at the old haunted house. See you on the other side.
Yeah, I like that.
Thanks, Mark.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Yep, you too.
Yep.
Bye. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.